So I don't know when or if, or he's got the meeting dates, so.
Thought we had everybody in the shop, but.
You can ignore this end.
Yeah. You can ignore it.
We need to focus on that end.
Yeah, you really should
He-
focus
He's got
right
a
here.
nice new haircut, we need to highlight
That's
that.
kind of reflective.
All right. Well, that'll be good enough.
All right. So getting started, everybody had hopefully an opportunity to review the minutes from the last meeting.
Just reading them now.
Okay. I'll accept a motion to pass the minutes or to approve them. Second. Thank you. Any questions, comments? Seeing none, all those in favor of the minutes? Thank you. All right, moving on. As far as the agenda for this evening, it'd be desirable, I think, to try to move through the basement stuff, but I'd like to take just a quick moment. Mike and I had an opportunity to connect earlier in the week, and part of what we were talking about is really the timeline. We just, you know, my concern is that we're either going to have to start meeting weekly, or we're going to have to make these meetings longer. We're really going to have to chew through the stuff, and I don't want to impose on everybody's time any more than we need to. But I don't know. Do you want to share what we kind of went through? Because you were able to Mike kind of laid out just a real simple, you know, timeline that kind of made me think, I think we need to get going.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I printed off some of these for those that have good eyes. There's these little ones, but I also have some larger ones here. I could pass around. Maybe we could share. This is pass those that way. There's some smaller ones too, if anyone.
Yeah, I'll take a small one.
You have good eyes, Matt?
I think so, that's what the IDOT's told me.
So all this is, and this is really preliminary, so don't take anything on this as etched in stone. But all I did was kind of on the left side list things that I think we need to do, and then culminating with some things that are coming up, like a town vote. I guess it's a referendum that's going to happen, and I don't know when that's supposed to happen, but clicking down, we started talking about the basement use criteria. I think we need to fully understand the building programming, whether it be the student use, the office use, and the basement use, so that we can relay that to Tyler. And Tyler may already know a lot of that information, but he needs to know the full programming so he can generate a schematic plan and then provide outline specifications. The reason you need the outline specifications is because you need that in the plan to give to cost estimator to get a cost estimate, which was the next thing on the list.
Mike, what
yeah.
is the time between having specs ready and getting a cost estimate?
Having specs.
How long do the cost estimators need?
Oh, well, if you have it lined up, I mean, I think they could pull together something in a week or.
In a week?
Yeah, I would think so.
Yeah,
Maybe 2 weeks.
Maybe 2 weeks.
depending how busy they
People
are.
are pretty busy right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
I am Carmen.
you know, and
Okay,
I'm kind of thinking this is a tool that we can manipulate,
Yeah, I
like,
just- people don't-
once we reach out to a cost estimator,
Hang
yeah.
on one second. Folks, let me introduce you to Carmen Bombeck. I'm so sorry. And she is our other resident expert, kind of along with Mike, to kind of help guide us in terms of you know, understanding what's involved in terms of renovating a building like this. You're a structural engineer.
So I lead the structural department at Garland University, and I do a lot of work on historic buildings in particular.
Great to have you, thank you.
Sorry I can't come to all the meetings, but I will. I have been reading the notes and things and keeping up with the emails, so.
Great, well,
Hopefully I
I'm glad
can
you can
contribute when I
make
can.
time with us. Great, I'm sorry.
Can
Mike.
I just make one quick comment? One of the things that a couple people said last time about the live stream was that since we aren't doing the name tag thing, it would be great if maybe at the beginning we would just do a really quick thing like, I'm so-and-so, I'm so-and-so.
Yeah, sure, absolutely, I think that makes sense.
And then maybe if everybody can also try to remember to speak up as much as possible too, just so that we can.
Yeah, no, the sound and the video, at least certainly for the last one, have been, I think,
was
have been
really good
really
last
good.
time, yeah.
So, awesome. All right, you want to do a quick introduction, and we'll go around the table, and then we'll get back to Mike.
Thanks. I'm Allison McKellar.
I'm Helen Scipione, I'm the coordinator of Zenith.
I am Marcia Dietrich, a school board member from Rockport.
I'm Pete Orn, I'm a school board member from Camden, and my day job is building schools.
Mike
part of it.
Mike Sabatini, I live in Camden.
Bob Lawson, Camden.
Carol Gartley, School Board for Rockport.
Meg Quijano, Camden.
Emily Lusher, Rockport.
Carmen Bombeck, Camden.
Matt Smith, assistant principal here at the middle school.
All right, thank you. All right, back to you, sir.
Yeah, so, again, these are just, I thought we could talk about what items need to be on this schedule, and then we could see when they need to be done and how one has to happen before the other, and then I can, fill it in and, but, what I do have down here, just to follow that through, once we have a cost estimate and we understand the bond costs and what possible rents are, we talked a little bit about that at the last meeting. I have a negotiated lease, but in talking with Bob, that's probably not in our wheelhouse. We probably won't do that, but so I crossed that one off. But ultimately, I think the charge of this board is to prepare recommendations to the board. And my understanding is all that has to be done by August, right?
Yep.
So
August 1st.
August
Oh,
1st, the
really?
beginning of August.
Thank you. Yeah.
So that's a good one to know right there. I mean, I'll put a star on that one right there, August 1st, so that's gonna happen right there.
So in terms of what you have here, Mike, this is essentially in the order that
Yeah.
these should be tackled?
Certainly the first, well, the basement use criteria can happen anywhere, but
Sure.
like the building programming, outline specification, and cost estimate have to happen in order.
Okay.
Understanding bond costs and rents, that can happen anytime. Obviously, preparing recommendations to the board has to happen at the end,
Right.
and prior to August 1st, apparently.
Yep.
When is the referendum
I
vote slated
just
to be?
actually have a couple of questions.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it's our responsibility to understand the bond costs. I mean, I think isn't that more of the
Well,
board?
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think where this comes from is if we're gonna talk about what the potential rent could be for the basement, as I understand it, Mike, we could talk about that as something that could help offset the cost of, or the expense of the bond, is that?
Costs of
Right.
creating
Well,
a
so
bond. I
what
think
I-
that maybe it's the verbiage that's.
What I said last time was, so if you have, there's Zenith brings possibly in some rent. I don't know what brings in rent to the building yet, but certainly if we rent out some of the basement, it's a positive inflow of money into the building. And does that money offset the cost of the bond that you need to renovate the whole building? And maybe that's beyond the scope of this committee, but it was in the context of, okay, how much space do we need to rent? That's what I was talking about at the time, but if that's not anything we need to do, then we'll take it off here. But
No, I was misunderstanding what
Okay.
you were saying, so it's fine.
we can
I
prepare
think it
that.
makes sense to call it like maybe taxpayer impact,
Oh,
understanding.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Because
basically
there
what
are
that's-
those costs that go
That's
along
basically
with
the
bond
crux of it
costs
right there,
are
yeah, that's the crux of it, is
separate.
what's the impact? And, if you're going out to voters on this referendum, how much is the bond gonna cost them and how much rent's coming in?
Right,
Is
to
ultimately-
help offset
And
some
how
of
much do they potentially save by the SAD or the CSD not having to rent the other place? But if I think we do need to come up with that basic number of, what the perceived taxpayer impact is gonna be.
Does
Where
that-
did the August 1st come from exactly?
The charter.
And because of the length of time it takes to get the bond organized and put on the referendum, is that my understanding?
Because
is
it
right,
has to,
Marcia?
even though the referendum's not till November, the referendum has to be set up
Mhm.
like in October sometime, I think, or even
September.
September. Yeah.
So,
And then you have to have the attorneys.
right, I mean,
draft
I
it.
understand that.
Yeah.
Some of it can happen, it seems like there's always a sliding scale about when things actually have to be ready. I know at the town, they start off saying, this is the deadline, and it turns out that none of those things are really actually the deadline. Not that, I'm not suggesting that we push things to the bitter end, but some of it in terms of the outreach to the public, or even some of the basement stuff, if between August and November, that's just not, I don't know
It
what
just
deadline
says-
that is.
On the charter, it just says the concept design and detailed cost figure will be done by August 1st.
Oh,
Okay.
So that's, I think, a little different than,
yeah.
Yes.
That kind of
Right.
is up a level, up one line, like under, yeah, I think.
yeah, and I
But
think.
But the board will need to vote on this at its August
meeting.
meeting, so the warrant can be signed at the September meeting, which is third September.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
that's where you get in the 6 weeks before the referendum.
Yeah.
And the charter says first, so.
So
That's
I would,
probably
yeah,
how
I
they
would,
figured out.
I hear what you're saying, Allison, but I'd still advocate that we
No,
drive
definitely. I'm
quickly.
just curious where that calculation came from.
What I'm wondering that isn't on here is, once we have something concrete, at some point, we're going to have means of communicating it to the public
Good point, we
hearings.
have to get the public outreach on here.
We talked
Yep,
about
no, that's a
that
great
as
point,
well.
yep. And I think there should be one earlier and then maybe one later.
Yeah.
We talk about even the means. I mean, we held for the first one, a lot of meetings here with maybe 30 or 40 people, and we had a number of them, and we always got the same 30 or 40 people, and then when it came time to vote, everyone was like, when'd you do this? I knew nothing about it.
Mm.
So perhaps even talk about the means we're going to use.
Yeah, yep, I totally
The
agree with
tabling
that.
was very successful.
The what?
The tabling that was done for the most recent referendum,
Like,
where they
yeah,
had
the-
What do you
tables
mean?
around
Yeah,
town, the farmer's
farmer's
market.
market.
Yeah.
Having actual tables out,
Oh, okay,
informational tables.
I see.
We're making up these new verbs. all
It's like Googling, only different, yeah.
And then the idea of, how much do we want to wait until the end to get the public input after, where we sort of defend what we've already decided, and how much of
Yeah.
it, people
So-
tend to find that a little bit.
Yeah, so if I could, so that's one of our agenda items, is to kind of talk about communication to the community specific to the basement, but I think that can be a more holistic conversation, so if we can hang on to that, but certainly in agreement, we need to take a look at that communication sooner rather than later, for sure. So we can add that to this list as we get to that point.
I think there's only one more question. Are we
Sure.
going to ask for public input before we get something final? Or are we just going to have something final and then communicate it?
I think the idea would be to ask for input. I think it's the right thing
Okay.
to do,
So
but
we
I
have
think
two
part of.
things to add on the timeline.
I think you're right, I think there's two.
Completely agree.
Okay.
And, but part of that, if I can, I think there's a bigger communication to the public. But right now, I'd like to kind of focus just on the basement for starters. So, because we really, I'm anxious that we're not really able to check off any boxes at this point, and not that I want to do it quickly and rush through it for the wrong reasons, but that we can actually move through some of this. So.
Thanks for this, Mike.
Any
Yeah,
other
you're
questions
welcome.
about the timeline? Then I think, we'll kind of connect with Tyler on some of this stuff, and then talk about where all this stuff will fit in to lay out the actual timeline.
My only question, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No,
Allison.
no, go-
My question was like, do we even need like anything beyond our recommendation? Like, is that helpful to anyone, like when the town vote is, I kind of took it to, well, what's the next step, go into construction drawings? When is the MET actually going to get renovated, and when does Zenith occupy it? Like, does that matter to us, or is that just
I
extra
think
information?
I think it would be good to know.
Yeah.
You know, personally, I think that's helpful to say, okay, if it were to pass,
You know, what's the next step?
you know,
Right.
yeah, because I think
Yeah.
the public would
So we'll
ask
ask
the
the
same
board.
question.
I
think
think
it's a
Maria's
fair
feeling
question.
pretty swamped, and I think, I'm guessing she would appreciate the help.
That thought process,
Yeah.
following that
Yeah.
all the way through to
Yeah.
occupancy, at least in scheduled form, not that we're gonna
Yeah,
chart it to do anything on it, but like,
yeah, I think that makes sense.
Maybe in like timeline form would be
Right.
even more generic, so that, you know, it would take 2 months to do construction documents, 12 months to do construction, you know, I mean, as opposed to saying November
Hard dates.
2019,
Yeah.
January, because that might make it so if for some reason it phased a little bit, waited a little bit while the larger middle school project was getting underway, you still would be able to know what those ranges were. Sometimes it helps to not have people lock in on things that are supposed to be
Yeah.
guiding points.
So is there a deliverable in there that we need to capture in terms of what we want to add, or what's the next step as it relates to the timeline here? I like this when Mike brought it up, because I think it essentially puts a roadmap in front of us, so we know what we need to do and when it needs to be done. Otherwise, you know, we can talk about the basement for the next 8 weeks, but I don't really know that that's in anybody's best interest, you know?
I think it would be beneficial to put some times on here, because I think you hardly have anything.
Well, we don't, that's part of, we kind of want to walk through some of that sooner rather than later, because I don't think there's a clear understanding as to what the timing is. on
I mean, if you're starting at the August 1st and you back up, you know, what does it take, 2 or 3 weeks to actually get together all the recommendations or get consensus on them when we actually had all the information? And it
Yeah.
takes 2 weeks to get a construction cost estimate, and it takes 3 weeks to put together the specs, then, you know, we're almost at
now.
now.
Yeah,
So I
exactly.
think, yeah, I mean, good point, because you're gonna have to
That's why I
crank on
wanted,
it.
that's why I wanted to do this, is so that, you know, I wanted to understand what all the tasks were, and then I can throw together a schedule as long as I understand it all, and it'll be pretty clear that we have to get our butts in gear, I think.
yeah, for sure. Allison?
2 things, if this isn't the right time to ask a question, then should we be leaving the basement discussion a little bit more? Are we gonna keep going until we've settled the basement issue and then do the rest of it? Or would it seems like a little bit, I know when I was presenting it this week, it was like to be asking if somebody wants to use the basement for a project that we really don't know if it is gonna happen or not. It would have been nice to be able to answer some more questions about the other part of it when I'm asking, you know, is there any interest in the basement? Because that's the part that is, I mean, it's only gonna happen if we succeed with figuring out something for Zenith and the superintendent's office. So maybe that's that's the non-negotiable highest priority thing that actually has to happen.
Yeah,
So maybe,
I don't disagree with you. I think, you know, trying to look at this with a bigger light as opposed to a pen light on the basement. I saw the basement as kind of a sticking point, that if we could at least smooth some of that out, so we at least understand what could or couldn't happen with the basement. And I quite frankly wasn't interested in really carrying on any more basement discussion beyond tonight, quite honestly. Hence the reason why the agenda is really kind of driven on that, so that we could really kind of put a nail in that and move on.
so could we would nail down the guidelines of what is and isn't acceptable, and then in the background, as we're working on everything else, we can be putting out feelers and trying to, you know, get this
Yeah,
tenant or that tenant.
If I could propose at least kind of where my head is, and by no means is necessarily the path, but I think the criteria is absolutely critical, because I don't think we can do anything without that, and that's the reason why it's kind of the center of tonight's agenda. So we can all at least come to an agreement, provide a recommendation to the board on what the criteria would be. Then beyond that is, you know, what's the best path forward to communicate to the public? There is space available. Here's the criteria in which it is available under, and then solicit input from the community of those who would be interested in perhaps leasing that space. So that was kind of where I was thinking that would be one of the first communications out to the public. I'd really be interested from everybody here is what's the best way to do that? And is it a table at the farmer's market? Is it, do we need to set up stations or something around town to communicate it? Is it something through the newspaper? I don't have an answer for that, I just have more questions. But clearly getting the word out that we're seeking input from the community as to what could go into that space, with the understanding that there may be some already may have some interest from some entities. So that was really kind of my initial thought. And then, yeah, I think the rest of the detail on the basement can just be an agenda item as we're going through everything else. Does that make sense?
Mhm. It may make sense to break into some subcommittees. I noticed that was in our charter.
Yeah.
That sometimes some of these things, a few of us getting together.
I think
Might
that's
make
makes a
a
lot of
little sense.
sense, for sure. Okay. Thank you, Mike, for this. So do you feel like you've got enough information that perhaps you can kind of start filling in some
I
of
do.
the boxes?
Yeah, I can, and I'll give a crack at the timing, and I'll reach out if I have any questions on that.
Okay, yeah. All right, perfect. Any other questions on the timeline before we move on?
I have a question.
Sure.
Since Tyler's not here, I wonder if it would make sense for you to just reach out to
Yeah.
Tyler and he could possibly have more information.
Yeah,
Because I think
outline
he was,
spec.
well, I think he's been working on the programming.
Oh, good.
But I don't want to assume, so it'd be good to
Yeah,
just
that's fair.
know that.
Okay. Before we dive into the criteria piece, which I think is going to take a little bit longer, I just wanted to do a quick update on my deliverable, specifically the teen center. Allison, if you have anything to share, I think that would be helpful as well. I did speak with Maria. She did meet with Melissa with the Y. The teen center is highly interested in moving into the basement. So that is definitely a very worthwhile opportunity if that's something that we wish to pursue. But they're very interested. And it would probably be, in one half, kind of the way Tyler more or less kind of carved up the space, is that they would take the larger piece, but they certainly expressed a large interest.
That's
And were
wonderful.
lease, rental rates discussed, or is this just more of a,
No.
I gotta ask the question?
Yeah, Not that I'm aware of. The only
Yeah,
other
that's our
thing,
Right.
the only other thing that I did follow up with Maria on was specific to the cost of, who handles the cost of capital improvements. And I said, is that something that the district is going to take over, or is that up to whoever would lease the space? She felt that the district would just kind of at least form the shell, if you will, that there would be something there for a tenant to work with. She said it really may depend on who or what the tenant was or is, but for the most part, that, the district would just kind of, here it is, and if it needs to be painted, or I think it was just kind of low-level capital improvements, and then whoever were to take over the space, if they needed something above and beyond, then perhaps that would be up to them. She kind of left it as it would depend on who the tenant would be, she felt. So I still feel like that there's room to negotiate, I guess, if that's the case. All right?
I think that's, Carol, maybe you can speak to breakwater, or Mike, you might know more, but that's quite common. It would be that the owner would provide a structurally sound, so in my case, that's what I get involved with, a structurally sound building that has stairs and egress and those things, and then that the tenant would frequently pay for their own fit out of whatever they want. If they want fancy, they get fancy, it costs more. If they don't, they're basic, it can kind of vary, but at least on a lot of the projects that I've worked on, it can be split up, that way. What do you
To
think?
offer a different perspective, though, often a nonprofit will not have that capital
Sure.
upfront, and
Yep.
so you wrap it into the construction costs, and the lease is significantly higher to get back those
And
construction
I
costs.
think that's probably where Maria was going with it, depends on who would move
Right.
into the space. So I
Right,
think
but
that
then-
makes sense.
But for us, or the district, that we have to be smart about the basement, and I know Mike and Carmen agree, that, plumbing in place for a kitchenette, or
Sure.
an extra bathroom, or something like that, so,
Or just a bathroom,
pardon me?
or just a bathroom.
Right, but,
Yeah.
we really need to have sooner rather than later conversation.
Well, yeah, and that gets to the programming again, right?
Yeah.
So you can do a layout and then wrap that all into the cost.
Right, yeah.
Bob, who was the person that you spoke with, you said about the
Melissa?
teen center?
Melissa.
Melissa, is that at the
Maria-
Y?
Maria spoke to Melissa at the Y. She's
Okay.
I guess, the new director or
Oh,
the director of
right,
the Y.
that's right. Okay, but, so it's just her interest? She just went, wow, that's great, what a good idea? Or has it been discussed on the board, their board?
I don't
I'm-
know that.
It's
Okay,
been discussed
I'm just
beyond
curious.
Melissa, it's been discussed.
It has?
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
I mean, it's been discussed for a couple of months now, actually.
even probably more than a year.
Yeah. But with Melissa, when she first got here.
Because one of the spaces we looked at was the teen center.
Right.
I was
So the
wondering
trading
about that.
spaces.
So they would be vacating that entirely?
Yeah, so
And
they have a
it's not to
building, they
speak
have
for
a
them.
building to sell, so probably capital's not
Yeah.
a
And
huge issue.
capital, politically, when the referendum goes to the public, it's gonna have a dollar amount attached to it. And that's what people are gonna focus on.
Right.
So even if the payment is offset by the rent, that
Yes.
part is gonna get hidden
Mm.
from the big letters at the top of the question.
Yeah.
So if it's gonna say 3 million versus 3.5, I think politically we wanna put it out as low as possible.
Yeah.
Understand.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's all I know, at least at this point, specific to the interest from the teen center, which sounds positive. Any news for you?
Yeah, so I spoke to the Historic Resources Committee about it, and there were a lot of questions. There's, of course, definite interest in doing something better. A lot of it comes down to the cost.
Sure.
The library is probably, the idea of like moving the Walsh History Center out of the library would be a long conversation. I wouldn't see them like jumping on that
Okay.
right away.
Yep.
But people feel, I've talked to a few different board members, everybody has different opinions about that. There's a definite need with the Kim Rockford Historical Society. They have, the Conway House, and then they have that museum. And they just did a roof repair, and it failed, and then everything got flooded, and so they've had a lot of, that building isn't great at all there, and it's only open during the summer for the most part, with like interspersed with a few different events. So there was discussion of, maybe we would move the paper things from there somewhere else. You'd still have your like antique shovels and all the stuff that goes along with the Conway House, and that working farm would obviously be there. But since they are planning on putting money into it right away for, just the paper artifacts. So maybe if we were to move like the the stuff from Camden and potentially some of the stuff from Rockport, and then the Kim Rockport Historical Society, the paper stuff. Of course, to get it to be like a really big, actual museum type of thing, that takes staffing and all of these things. So it would, I think it might be, one of the things we talked about was maybe there would be a place where there would be a document storage place, and maybe the school district could use that too, and that would be sort of limited hours, but then there would be pieces pulled out from the collection that could be, displayed on walls or in conference rooms, or you could kind of have like a rotating thing, since people are already going to be in that building. It might be a place to just display some things. You look in the Knox Mill, and the Knox Mill has, different things in alcoves here and there, and it might be an opportunity to do that with some of the decorating. But there's, nobody can say, oh yeah, sure, we'll get fundraising right away, but there's definite interest, so.
Yeah, and I think that was really just,
Yep.
the idea is just, if this were to materialize, would there be interest, or, perhaps we're already going down another path and it doesn't really matter, so, but it sounds like it's.
Yeah,
could be
yeah,
probably-
there's definitely interest.
Okay, perfect, thank you. Any other questions about that? All right, I do know Maria shared one of with me, is there's a gentleman who I guess has a Wizard of Oz museum or something.
Oh, yes.
So there is,
Hi, Tyler.
there is that also. Maria mentioned, she said there's still interest in that as a possibility as well. So I didn't want that to get lost. All right, so I think at this point, I'd like to kind of dive into being able to establish criteria for the basement that we could recommend to the board. Mike sent out a few thoughts that he had after the last meeting. Carol was kind enough to share some information that I passed on to everybody today. We'd really like to kind of see if we could start dialing this in if we could. So I am open, or Emily's ready to scribe away for in terms of ideas specific to criteria. You know, and I'll go ahead and start, and it really kind of captures a little bit off of what Mike had started with. I think, you know, something that would be compatible with the understanding that there's a middle school adjacent as a part of the property, essentially. So that means, you know, is it something that could be education oriented, certainly very kid-centric as well, I think would be important, whether it's a tutoring or after-school arts and things of that nature. So I felt like something compatible with the school would be important. The other would be compatibility with the district office and Zenith. I mean, you're going to have them upstairs, so that would mean, I keep going back to my horrible example of, you know, you couldn't have a garage in the basement and work on cars or things that would create noise, or things that would be conducive to having an office one floor up above. Being one of the people who happens to live very close by, if we're going to be some type of a business or some entity where I wouldn't think, and having talked to some of my neighbors, having an increase in traffic on Knowlton, I don't think would be desirable. So is there an opportunity to have some type of entity in there that didn't necessarily increase traffic? The other was something that I think Wax had brought up as well, having a space that's maybe managed by one specific entity, even though there might be different components to that, such as one type of a business office environment or workspace environment, where there were other independent offices or things as a part of that, but one entity would manage that. Key to this was the fact that the district is not in the business of being a property manager. So taking a look at what would go in that space that would not really require an enormous amount of management, I think is going to be pretty important. And the only other piece is, I thought it'd be nice if it were something that benefited both the Camden Rockport community or even the five-town community is around us. And some of what I think Allison shared was appealing to me because I think that's very community-centric. So those are just some initial thoughts that I had in terms of just trying to lay out criteria. What Carol sent over earlier today really kind of talked about some things that I thought were very foundational, which I think really made a lot of sense as well.
And if I could just clarify where that came from,
Sure.
that's out of one of my commercial leases, but, yeah, and I left the name in there, but I just wanted everyone to see that when you have multiple tenants, in a large building, this is a 90,000 square foot building that I'm referring to, everyone has to be compatible. So it's important to not only recruit appropriate tenants, but also to have that in the lease. And I'm sure our attorneys would do that as well. But I wanted you to see what something like that looked like.
That was very helpful.
Yeah. It does cover a lot of stuff,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah,
But like the overnight parking, like, and this is helping with the neighborhood, you know, I don't think the neighborhood wants tenants that are in there all night long doing things, you know, it's a
Agreed.
quiet,
No,
so
I
it
agree,
needs to
yeah.
be stated.
Yeah.
No overnight parking, not making meals, you know, it's not a restaurant, it has to fit in with the zoning,
Yeah,
et cetera, et cetera.
It is, you know, it's a neighborhood.
Yeah.
So I think that's important. Any other thoughts?
Well, you know, I was thinking ideally, when you're talking about the teen center, I would love to see one unit being in there instead of multiple, you know, say the teen center here and something else there and something else. I mean, it would be easier administratively, and there's less chance of, people moving in, out, and it said something about you have to have a 10-year lease or something, or the school board is looking for people to sign a
The
10-year
legal
lease.
attorney's advice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something.
Well, I
stable.
just, I think having one organization or one type of, well, not particular business, I don't think of the teen center as a business, but
Yeah.
to me, that sounds ideal. The teen center sounds like a perfect fit for this
Take
program.
over the whole space.
Yeah, if they would. I don't know if they need that much space, but.
I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. Marcia?
I wonder if we know what, let's say it is the teen center, what's the wise time frame for making a firm commitment?
I don't know.
It's possible it wouldn't be by November.
Yeah, I think that's certainly possible.
Hi, Jim.
So we could be going out, talking to voters and maybe even having people vote on something with it being very likely but not having been executed.
I think that's possible.
I think it's probable. Given the time
Sure.
between
Yeah.
making a decision, going to referendum, and actually doing the project and having the space available, even if you get a signed commitment, nothing to say you can't get out of it
Yeah.
2 years from now when push comes to shove. So
Yeah.
I think it's coming up with just a reasonable idea that the public can support the concept, because the entity might change between now and the time we actually fill the space.
Yeah, don't disagree at
That's
all.
why I think some of these ideas are important, the educational component, or some of these criteria. So this is the vision that I think we're gonna need to use to sell the final concept to the public.
Mhm. Yeah, the last thing I think I'd want to do is, okay, so the basement is available. Well, what's gonna go in there? And all the more reason why I'd really like to have us walk away tonight with a clear understanding of what the criteria could be, even if it's, much like what Carol put together, is something that's fairly foundational, but, fairly well dialed in enough so that there is, if we need to add a little more meat to the bone, we can do so. But,
So,
Yeah.
yeah, so how many square feet?
Minutes, I think.
It's like-
6,000,
usable in the basement?
3,800 on one side and 2,900 on the other.
An extra copy of the
Packet that we have, it's actually.
Oh, he's got one for you.
So do we want to go at it with the things that will not go in there, or the things that will? I thought Carol's thing, that was a pretty nice drop, not excluding too much, but do we want to maybe start with that as a working?
I think that'd be great.
The only thing that jumped out at me from that is, do we want to exclude meal preparation? Or what exactly does that mean? And
I think why I have that, or we had that in our leases, is that once you get into meal preparation, then you have to have hoods and venting and fire suppression systems and all kinds of things. So that's
does
a
like the
big
teen center
add.
need to be able to make, what constitutes meal preparation? Like a kitchenette or a,
No, a kitchenette would not be considered meal preparation.
Any stovetop is gonna require a hood.
is that something
Like a
that,
microwave is okay. Coffee pots are okay.
Refrigerator's okay.
Toasters are okay, refrigerators, but a range is not okay,
is that,
right? Tyler?
if somebody else is building it out?
Here.
Makes sense.
Do we, I just don't know, I just don't want to exclude something like, if the Y needs to be able to, I don't know what's in there right now, but how many possible tenants would that exclude? Like, I know a lot of even, churches and things, they cook things and I mean, I just don't know how many possible tenants that would exclude.
Carol, is that in there, the preparation of meals piece, and your advice on having that in, or at least the way it's in there right now? Because of the complications of what you have to do to the structure to make it safe to prepare meals, is it sort of a...
So if you had a tenant that that was their business model, was creating food, then that would be part of the lease and that would be appropriate, and you would negotiate all of that and you'd have the appropriate safety things.
Okay.
This is for someone who that conversation didn't happen. So for a tenant to all of a sudden bring in a range and start
Okay.
cooking, that's against the lease, that's not a conversation, it's protecting the landlord and the building.
Right.
So that's why you have something
Yeah.
like that in the lease. It's not excluding a tenant, it's just, this is a snippet from a lease
Gotcha.
Right, I see.
for general office purposes.
So from our point of view, for the experts around the table, is there if we did not have that line, so we were sort of leaving it open to the possibility of someone that is preparing meals in the technical sense, is that create problems that we probably want to avoid for the building?
So I would ask Tyler, do we
someone-
get in a whole different level of uses? Like if someone wanted a commercial kitchen in the
Yes.
basement, and then we have educational, so are we building a whole fire enclosure envelope?
Yeah, there's a significant change when you add a commercial kitchen to any structure.
Yeah.
If you've seen the plans, that we've got the family consumer sciences portion of the new middle school, which has fire suppression ranges and all of these other things that are the result of basically that range. And especially for protection of the building, it's a critical component.
I would add also that those fans that run those hoods are noisy,
They are.
and
They're expensive as well.
They're super
Yep.
expensive.
and you run into problems with vibrations and things. And so if you have an office use right above the fan, it can kind of get irritating.
Yep.
So at what point does something become a commercial kitchen? Is,
If you're preparing food.
I think it's the
for
second you
sale.
put a range in.
Yeah.
A range is considered
okay.
commercial.
Carmen, you had your hand up, sorry.
I was just gonna say, I think Mike's point about the noise and the vibration is really the part that we would focus on, because it's really about, that's about the compatibility. I feel like excluding a commercial kitchen because it's expensive to implement is not really our job. If a tenant wants to come in and has an expensive to implement plan that they want to do, I don't know why we would exclude them, prohibit them from doing that. It seems logical that they wouldn't do it in that space, but I think the functionality things are really, like the noise and the vibration are the main reasons to look at it. I wonder if you might be able to propose something that's like starting with what's here, looking and saying, coming up with some proposed general language, and then maybe a list of items that we might identify that would only be permissible, upon proper negotiation, and then highlight some of those, such as preparation of meals. So, because this lease was made once you already knew who the tenant was,
That's
right? So
right.
when you're trying to make something generic for us to recommend to the board, maybe it is focused on, is gonna be, or preferred to be used for education,
General
child,
office.
More
community
list- more
center,
list
office,
form
those
than-
things.
Yeah.
One of the things to me, setting up criteria, is that you are naturally going to exclude certain things. That will just happen.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why you have criteria.
That's kind of nice, right?
Yeah, so, I mean, it's nice not to be excluding people and to leave options open, but I think we are going to have to exclude some things.
I think
And I would think
We have to,
kitchen
'cause if-
preparation would definitely be a thing that you wouldn't want there.
We don't want 50
We don't want
proposals
manufacturing.
to have to, because we don't
Right.
have capacity, because we've looked at our list already and it's pretty long. So, I mean, I plucked 55 out yet, but we do need to streamline just for the sake of getting the job done as much as anything else. And there are things that we have as criteria down. I mean, I really like the list that Mike sent out as a straightforward, kind of simple. I really like the language that Carol proposed that has a bit more technical. It sort of reads a bit more in a serious kind of leasey language. Obviously, it's a lease, so it does.
Yeah.
But there could be a way of combining those, and some of the things that we're talking about are perhaps the preferred. There's the required components of it, which I personally think some of the things around like hazardous something in your, I think chemicals not normally in a business use are things that sort of have come up, like we don't want a car repair shop in there, right?
Right.
So there are certain things that seem to be like, these are non-negotiables, like we're not accepting anything with these in it. And then there are the pieces that seem, we would like it to have an education component. I don't know if that's necessarily a complete criteria. If it didn't fit that, storage doesn't fit an educational component, but it's palatable to us. So it seems like we could get a list of, it has to be this, meet these criteria, and these are the things that we're looking for, preferred criteria, kind of like a job advert that you put out there.
Yeah.
So, and I feel like we've got a pretty good starting point to get us quite a lot closer to that, because I like what Mike did and I like what Carol added. So I think there's a lot there that we could just reconfigure, and a lot of that makes a lot of sense to me.
Okay,
I agree.
any other comment?
Would it make sense to have an attorney? I don't know how the attorneys work, but look at that, because I, like saying, you know, we prefer this, I almost wonder, like, you know, you can't prefer to rent your apartment to people who don't have kids, for
Right.
example, right? So I would be.
Can advertise that.
Right, but we can't advertise, right, but I mean,
Actually do it,
that's
just
something
can't
I don't know
advertise.
about, but I wonder, you know, if we took this criteria and we took this sort of lease language, and then maybe our step is to say, we're pretty sure on these things, can you tell us how we should word these together to be appropriate recommendation to the board? I don't know who that would be.
Carol?
And then I'm wondering if Tyler, or maybe Mike, you knows the zoning restrictions, because I think that came up once already, didn't it?
We have
We're in the
a-
village, so.
We have a zoning summary that we did early on in the project that if you give me the list of things that you're looking at, we can do a pretty quick check.
Mhm.
And then
So
one of
that
the things
might help
that we were asked to do as part of our proposal is that if you decide that you want to move forward with something that doesn't currently comply, that we start to make that process happen through the town side.
And we can do that. That would be one thing that maybe we could take off the shoulders of Oak Point, because we now have a town planner who does all of that, and we can, I mean, I think we could take over that part of it on the town side too.
But this isn't a town project, so I think,
But he's gonna be working with the town of Camden to determine whether it complies with Camden zoning. So I know that was a sticking point last time when the document went out that said, like, this is allowed and this isn't allowed, and you know, the interpretation from the town was a little different in some places, and, I mean, it's, our town planner is, that's what we pay him to do, is to help with that kind of a thing, to understand what's allowed and what's not in the district is definitely falls under the purview of the town of Camden. I mean, it's town of Camden zoning, it's not a town of Camden project.
right.
Yeah, well, I think
What I'm saying is that we're the client of Oak Point, and just working through those nuances to have maybe even a small committee and have Mike and Tyler and Carmen kind of have that conversation with the town planner.
Well, maybe that's what I was gonna
Instead of
suggest.
just, I mean, I think we need someone kind of coming from our point of view, and I'm not, I agree, he's fantastic, but it's a relationship, so.
Oh, he's brand new, so we can reserve judgment until,
So
but I
that's
think
even
it's,
more reason then that we have our own advocates talking to the
It's
planners.
also important to keep the line of applicant and reviewer
Mhm.
separate as well, where you will be actually applying for either a change of zone, depending on which uses that we come up with, so that we would be the advocate for the school side, or the project side, really. And keeping that so that your professional staff within the town can review these impartially outside of what you're asking.
I mean, I'm just saying, people come to us all day long in the town planning side of it, and they come in and they ask, and then they meet with the town planner and the code enforcement officer, and there are things that are just very clear, and then we say, no, under that, you know, situation, you would need a special exception or a variance, or, so there's, I mean, I definitely agree that you would be involved at some point, but some of the legwork, we could just take off your hands to
Yeah, I think we might be talking about two different things as well.
maybe.
So there's the actual review of what's allowed. That's a pretty minor component to this. I think what I'm referring to is that, say you decide that you want to have a church and it's not an allowable use in this zone, that part of what we were asked to do is actually to change the zoning.
And we do that, I mean, so,
But it's typically up to the applicant to be that person. The town doesn't typically, on behalf of another project, move something like that.
no, the town wouldn't, of course, initiate it.
So that's why I
But-
think we're talking.
But we
about
would, you know, a change in the zoning map, for instance, like, if we just moved this into the adjacent zone, all problems would go away. So that, we have talked about it a fair amount, since we did the change for the height, it's been this conversation that is, so we've looked at lots of different ways that could be accomplished. And, I mean, I'm not trying, I just know that you guys are super busy, and I am volunteering to, you know, have our town planner come, and it's just a very common thing that happens all the time.
They're gonna be involved either way, whether we are the ones communicating back or not, so that's,
I think
we're
sometimes-
open to any of that.
Sometimes there's different interpretations that can be made, so it's often, I think, beneficial to review the ordinance and from the client side, determine how it could be interpreted to the benefit of what you actually want to do, and then advocate for that and go with that, as opposed to just sort of going out and saying, tell me the rules. The rules are written down. So I think that's what Tyler's saying. It's a pretty simple task for someone who does that on a regular basis, just like it is for Jeremy, because that's his job, to review it and say, here's what it
No,
says.
I mean, it's actually all the time subject to interpretation, and we argue about it all the time, and I definitely agree that you can look at the rules and say sometimes, oh, let's try and figure out a way to make that happen, or let's try to figure out a way to not make it happen. I don't think there's any danger of the town not being on, I mean, that was part of the reason I think I was on the committee. There's no one side and the other side on this. I think this is a situation where we would want it to be
Well, I think,
able to happen.
you know, at least
But
from,
we don't have to keep talking about it.
from where, yeah, to kind of wrap it up a little bit so we can move forward, I don't disagree that, you know, at some point in time, the town planner is going to be involved. But I think we're trying to talk about establishing the criteria
Yeah.
initially. And then I think it does make sense, you know, do we talk with the board attorney about language, first of all? And then second, you know, then do we talk to the town planner in terms of zoning for, at least based on this foundational criteria? Beyond that, if we're wanting to change the scope of what could happen in the basement, I think that's probably down the road, at least as I understand it.
Well, we
That
can't
makes
very
sense?
well
Well, we're
go
not
to
really
voters.
down, we don't have time for down the road.
That's my, well, but.
I mean, if we're gonna set up
understand.
criteria and we take this to the voters and we really say, well, it could be something this, and we're thinking about changing zoning, and I think that's much too complicated to get into. I don't think that's where we wanna go.
I agree.
Maybe a criteria is it has to fit in the current zoning.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
That's
I
what
would think that we would want to
To
maintain
change the zoning is gonna take. a
our
while.
existing, you know, what's already allowed in terms
Yep.
of the zoning.
Yep.
that's
We're
already-
in a very restrictive zone, and
Yeah.
there are a lot of people that think that it was actually a mistake, that that the school was meant to be in the same district as the wastewater treatment plant, and it's a funny map, the way it is. But community building already, you know, it's like, how do you interpret community building? That already, municipal use is allowed, a community building is allowed as a special exception, I think. It's probably, the Y would be fine. But we should figure out if we're gonna need a zoning change at all, because we can't very well come up with a plan that would require, say, oh, the tenant is gonna be X, Y, or Z, and the voters approve something that actually is against our zoning laws, so.
Well, I guess that's where I go back to the criteria.
Does anyone have the zoning? You have the zoning, Tyler?
Yeah, so there's a list of permitted special exceptions other than residential in this traditional village district, which was, Allison, you mentioned, the community buildings, municipal uses, nursery schools and daycare centers, public schools, and then this kind of loosely defined quasi-public facilities, which they defined as a facility for a recognized public purpose, such as an auditorium, library, park, or museum.
So office use is not,
It's not. It's a very restricted list, and one of the things that was specifically added to our task is that early on, as you've decided what this piece is, that if we need to change the zoning, that we do it now prior to a referendum.
I think at least getting office use as a changed zone is really important. I didn't realize it was that restricted.
Yeah, and as Allison mentioned, I think it's the river.
The transitional river business.
Yes, is the next zone just down the hill, starts at the mills, ends on the other side of the teen center, I believe. It's like this property, like she mentioned, when we went through the height, we had two options. The town attorney thought that just the height change was an easier thing to tackle than redistricting the whole piece. But if we start that process now, it may be that it's done, we get it out of the way before the referendum in November. And that, I think that was the intent of putting that work in our scope.
Now that you tell me what that
That would
zoning is, I
seem-
tend to agree
Yeah,
with you.
yeah.
That
Oh
should
my
be like
gosh.
on the
Yeah.
top priority list.
Yeah,
Right.
put that on your document.
I mean,
Yeah.
putting it into,
Yeah, right.
into the
Yes,
other
definitely.
district, into the adjacent
Get us on
district
the
is,
agenda.
like, in general, the town is trying to not add multiple layers to all these different, that's what we're doing all the time, to solve one little problem. We're like, well, let's add one special exception here, and special, and you have layers and layers, and it's maddening to read it all. So changing the district would be simpler, and because it's a school property, it's always gonna be the school board deciding what happens there anyway, so there's no risk of the school board, trying to operate some kind of all the different business, there's not gonna be a tannery here, there's not gonna be so we'd probably be pretty safe moving it into the other district, but we can talk more about that another time.
Well, so
Well,
is that cost of rezoning or your time anticipated in that price?
Yes.
So it may be.
Based on this list, we assumed that anything that wasn't a school use was going to require some
Right.
action
And I remember
by
that.
both the planning board and the select.
But
board.
not a
And the
teen
zoning
center
board of appeals.
tenant,
Yeah, I
because
think-
they're already in this zone.
Well, they're not, but
That will need
I
a
think
special
that's-
exception from the,
Yeah, I think that falls into that quasi-public facility, that it's recognized for a public purpose, such an auditorium, library, a park room. I think it, and this is where we would have to talk to the town planner, but I think that's what that quasi-municipal kind of catch-all would do, would pick up some of that stuff.
it seems to me like it might be really important for you to get Maria to authorize you to pursue that immediately. to
I
get
think
us-
we already are
Okay.
authorized. I think it's we would wait for this board to come to a point, and if you're there now, we'll start.
It's our charge.
I
We'll
think
start the work.
I mean, we do the straw poll or.
Well, it sounds like we need a motion, quite frankly, to move forward, correct?
Well, I guess, we would just want to be clear on exactly what you're asking us to do. Do you want us to start off by getting better definitions of what some of these things that you're talking about, do they fall into these, like the teen center? Or do you want us to begin the application process for a rezoning effort?
what do you recommend based on what you've heard?
Yeah.
Based on what we've heard, it sounds like if you're renting to anyone other than the teen center, that you're going to need something. So,
Good.
and I imagine this is a 2 to 3 month process on the good side, so.
Right.
the Cameron Rockport Historical Society, something like that could probably be considered a quasi-municipal, if we put some town documents or school documents there too.
Something for
That's why it goes in front of the zoning review board, which Emily is onto that committee. So they don't meet that often, but all those things that are listed as special exceptions, there's just a board of people that gets together and decides, like,
So we would be requesting a change because we want to keep options open for the basement
Flexibility, yeah.
That's what I'm
without
hearing.
requesting any specific use.
correct.
Right.
Well, what does
Well-
the adjacent district allow?
Let me see if I can pull it up. If you go on, I'll look up see if I can pull it up real quick.
Okay.
But they got, at a minimum,
Like
it
every-
includes offices.
You have it
things.
handy?
Yeah, because
I
it
can
includes
get
the
it out.
old mill, right?
Offices, it probably includes, it would include the storage facility, it would include offices.
Everything happening on Milton Street here and Mechanic Street.
Right.
So, I mean, it sounds like
Yeah,
the
it sounds
motion
like
would
the-
be to get Oak Point to go and try to get this change to be moved into that district, but I think we'd want to know what, at least here, what is allowed in that district.
Yeah, I'd
In
like to
that.
know, because what if that throws up alarms for people, like, oh my God, now it's opened up to anything, and then
Right.
the residents around
I
here.
thought Bob
sewer
was gonna be
systems.
nervous.
Yeah, like, I
Bob's not
almost,
gonna go for this.
I almost wonder if it wouldn't be better to target change of, get uses approved in this zone.
Yeah,
It's a little more targeted, that might not,
otherwise we'd have a zone
I don't know.
right through our property.
The
No,
issue
it's-
though is
it's
you're dealing with the
zoned
village
entire
district.
property.
So
Yeah.
if you try to mess with the village district too much, then that's that's
Everybody.
like
No,
the
I see what
traditional
you're saying.
village.
Yeah, no,
So
that's true.
that's why they had to be so specific with the height. It was like for, buildings existing before this time that are also a school, that are also this, that are also that.
We had some kind of carefully crafted language from the town attorney.
Yeah, I think, again, speaking as a property owner in the neighborhood, my first thought is, okay, so what does that do to my property value if all of a sudden zoning, there's a type of zoning change that is a risk of negative impact?
But it's only the
I think you're
street,
actually
but it's
already
only
in
the
that zone.
It's only
property.
this, yeah,
So what-
and you're already in the neighborhood,
what
right down the
Right.
street.
Like the
It's
teen
the
center
same.
may already be in,
I wonder,
Yeah.
is there a way you could just attack the definitions, like if it's quasi-public, if 60% of the building is public, then other uses could get added on or something like that, like, can you amend a definition to make this work? I don't know.
They don't like doing that.
Yeah.
Zoning, you know that.
but we do it all the time. That's where Jeremy really is, the code enforcement officer, and all that. They really do deal with this all the time, so they can come up with, okay, here are your options, and then some of
We need
it's.
to have a sit-down with him. I know he's new, but like,
Oh, okay.
He really is good. He was a Bangor code enforcement officer for a long time, and he's already pointed out to us multiple things we were about to have people vote on that were like not quite right, and he's pretty good.
So it's the transitional river.
Right.
zone.
BTR.
BTR. And there may be a zone that's more appropriately fitting to your needs that we look at.
But
Then they're gonna say
but then
you
you're
pulled that
changing the
up,
whole
Tyler.
time.
Yeah.
Okay.
The only ones, the only other zone that's contiguous to this property is that transitional river zone. Everything out around it is an
Is the-
R.
is the,
It's residential.
it's V, it's village, right?
It is village now.
I think he's saying the only other one that's even,
It's the only other one that's contiguous, yeah.
Yeah, they don't like just make islands of,
I do think though that you'd want to at least allow, you'd want to open it up more to have like office space or some other things.
So,
because-
Well, the
like
central
river?
office is office space,
Right,
so
on the other side of the river's the same.
But like
zone as
Peter
the
said,
other
even if you
of,
signed on with the YMCA and you're anticipating having the teen center, 18 months later,
White's the river.
who knows what happens, the teen center can't
Right.
come. Now it's a real fiasco to go
Yeah.
get a variance or an ordinance change to then
Yeah.
be able to, have an office thing. So I think you'd really want to get it wider than the quasi-public, unless, I think Mike's idea is interesting, unless you can somehow, get an interpretation that pretty much
Most of the
regardless, because
building
of the
is-
whole property and the whole building's going to be used, you could pretty much use any use because it's a minority, it's a very small area. That would be an interesting,
there's language over
Idea
there
to
that
consider.
defines that.
that would mean though that essentially you could propose anything.
Why don't we have Tyler find out what our options are
Yeah, we can reach out to
Yeah.
your new planner.
and come back?
But I did find that requirements for the transitional river, it's pretty much anything for residential. It lists pretty wide for municipal and institutional, so it's churches, community buildings, municipal uses, nursery schools, daycares, private schools, public schools, and then the quasi-public. And then there's a huge section of commercials. There's boat and marine sales and service, commercial schools, food service, exclude drive-through, financial services, funeral homes, hair salons, hotels, motels, inns, auction sales, boat and storage, professional services. Then it just keeps going, kind of going on. It really is all encompassing on
So
everything good, bad.
That
and
scares me a
ugly
little
that could
bit.
go
Yeah.
on.
me
That's a
too.
little too much.
the
Transitional
only,
river.
the only way to combat that, I think, would be for the school to restrict themselves, but. like-
Right. Like,
Like, we're gonna go into the zone, but as a, because this is a school property, we're gonna narrow this down to.
Exactly. It's gonna remain a municipal building and the school board, the leaseor.
Right.
So you're gonna have much more control over what's in there, so it might take some of that edge off for you. And then,
Yeah,
there's
I feel
actually,
comfortable trusting the school board not to have like boat I think that's a pretty good way to get voted off the school board if
Yeah. There's a lot
if
of,
they really went wild with what.
there's
allowed.
industrial and utility uses. You can have public utilities and road construction companies.
Right, but this would allow something like someone to have a dance studio, right? Which
Right.
might actually be
Be
something
good,
interesting
yeah.
and would be great. We exercise, kids could participate. I mean, there's a lot of kids doing that Kias thing or whatever. You know,
Yeah.
there's a lot of things like that that right now I think are prohibited.
Well, there's a
So we
dance
can
studio
always-
right across the street from the school. People to People Dance Company's been there for 20 years.
How was that?
Probably a home occupation.
No, because it's leased, it's not the landlord who's running the school.
Then you may
My
have
daughter
just
did
outed
that 20
somebody
years
that.
ago.
At least 20
Yeah.
years ago.
Oh, yeah, at least.
All right,
I don't know what
so
you're talking about. I've never seen that.
to kind of move this forward.
Maybe it's Grand.
Is it essentially, Tyler, I guess would you be able to find out what our options are? Would you be able to do that by the next meeting, do you think?
I think so.
Okay.
Do you want to share our
Just
initial
make a
timeline with
recommendation.
Tyler in case, I don't mean to be taking us backwards, but he
No,
might be
no,
very
that's all right.
valuable.
But, share what, I'm sorry?
I did
Before
it.
you came, we had a great
I can get them out.
timeline.
And I think Maria asked to share as well that if there was any overlap with space that might be flex for daytime adult education, that need is starting to become more apparent, that I guess they've got a lot of interest in some programs, painting, art, other things for elder members of the public.
So did she indicate, would that be in the basement or in another?
Yeah, she was wondering if we could add that to the list of things to consider for the basement. So that if there's some sort of an overlap in a multi-use thing, that it's that function during the day in the teen center in the afternoon.
Adult ed.
Yeah, that's.
Currently doing some at the teen center and some at Midcoast Rec. I mean, they're doing them at other places because, you know, some people don't want to go out at night, they want daytime
Oh, no, I-
classes.
right.
So I don't know whether they're saving money by not renting,
No,
what they're
I-
using now.
Well, and I think it kind of lends itself at least a little bit to keeping it, maybe not kid-centric, but education-centric. So I think that's, all right. So specific, going back to the criteria, so we can kind of put a pin in that. I'm happy to try to pull what Mike put together, what Carol shared, and just put something together that perhaps we could give to the board attorney to review and shape the language, but at least he would have a framework to go from. Would that be a reasonable? I don't mind taking on that deliverable, and I could share it with the committee, and if there was any input as a result of that. Carol?
We have a board meeting next week. I'm just wondering if, what you guys think, if we should be having this conversation with the rest of the board, you know, like the rough draft before we send it to attorneys.
I think we should just share it with the board.
Mhm.
I
What'd you
mean,
say?
the board has discussed MET, you know, for years now,
Mhm.
so I don't think there's going to be strong ideas added.
Well, I would look at it,
You?
just what I propose putting together is just kind of a framework based on what was shared here. And I'd probably do it like within the next 24 hours, so I could get it to everybody here on the committee. You could review it. If you felt like, yeah, Bob, I think you're kind of off here, that we get that input, it's done, and then, you know, you want to share it with the board next week first, that, you know, you guys would need to give some direction on
But
what
don't you
what
think we
wanna
have
do
to
with it.
sign off on it? At the board level?
No.
You don't think we do? I thought that was part of our charge.
It
but I
seems
could
like
be
the
wrong.
board should
We're gonna
do, you know, to go through a lot of, we would kind of want them to make sure the board's on board before we go too far, right? Because if we get to the end of this and then the board's like, no, we didn't want this or that, or,
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we're looking for language to eventually use in our recommendation to the board. And the way I'm thinking of this is we've got preferential uses that we want to put out, and we also have a list of kind of restrictive uses that we don't want to encourage. I think having the administration go to the lawyer and kind of draft that language for us is appropriate.
Yeah,
For approval.
I don't mind just putting together the framework, and then whatever the legalese needs to be beyond that is certainly fine. I don't know if you guys don't feel like the board needs to review that first.
We will report to the board, like all of the other committees, and if there's any strong opposition to the path we're on, we should
Well, I
hear it at
guess
the
that-
board meeting, and then they're gonna approve the entire thing at the end. I don't think they're gonna approve
Okay.
every step we take.
I think we're just looking for, errors that we're making along the way.
Sure.
Yeah, so I mean, we'll report out, and I think we just need that affirmation from the rest of the
Yeah.
board that, yeah, you guys are going on the right track. Keep moving. Yeah.
Okay.
Now we'll apologize.
Tyler, did you have a question?
What?
I was just gonna
You're mumbling
recommend,
over
If not,
there.
if not, we'll apologize.
That's right.
I was just gonna recommend that anything that you send to your town attorney be clear and concise with a very specific request on what you want him to review.
Well, would this go
Yeah.
to the town attorney or this?
Or,
go to
Right.
the
school attorney,
School
sorry.
attorney.
Let's
But the
just-
same thing applies
This
with
goes
sending
Yes,
this.
just,
Yeah.
it was just a
Yeah,
thoughtful recommendation for your
No, it's a
pocket.
good
But do it
recommendation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
through Maria,
yeah, I would
because
just
we're generating
give it to
an expense.
Maria.
It's an expense, yeah.
We're
Right.
not allowed to.
Oh, can I ask you a question?
We have no place.
Tyler mentioned about like if you apply for the zoning change, it could take a number of months for that to happen. Is there a chance that at the end of that process, you would be denied? Like I don't,
The whole
I
town
know
votes
there's
on
like,
it.
I'm
Yeah,
sure that
it's-
there is literally a chance that things can be denied, but like, is it pretty much like, oh, there's a zoning, so the reason I'm asking is that, looking ahead to that and somewhat knowing the odds of that seem to help us, because we can't, if we're putting proposals together with someone in the basement whose leasing of the basement is dependent on a zoning change that we don't know about until November, and then that zoning change doesn't happen, that doesn't feel like it's that's a, I don't know, but I also have literally no idea of what I'm really talking about other than just the logical thought of that. So I don't know how realistic that is or not, or if it's something that you guys would say like, no, don't worry about it, it's fine.
It's
yeah,
whatever the public
it's a
decide,
public, right.
sometimes somebody
The zoning
decides to
change
make a
public
big deal
vote.
out of something and.
Oh, is it?
Exactly. So the way that that process works is we start with the planning board. So it's very similar to what we went through with the height changes, that we make an application to, first it goes to town staff, get put on the agenda for the planning board. They will hold a couple meetings, they have to have a public hearing, then they take action on it, and then it gets moved up to the Board of Selectmen, who also have to do, it's a minimum of 2 meetings. You have to have the informational meeting and then a public hearing.
And then we set the public hearing.
And
yeah.
then
And then that's when we
they take
recommend.
action, and then if it's approved at the Board of Selectmen, they will call for a special town meeting.
Right.
And that's where the public will come out, the members of the public, much like the height one.
Right.
Whoever's at that special town
Okay,
meeting,
yeah.
and it's at the discretion of the selectmen on when they call that.
And we try not to do it too much. We try to do it in June and November when there's already an election. With school things, there's like this fast tracking thing you can do by calling a special town meeting. And that's when people just come to a meeting, and it's like, that's how we did the solar stuff and the school stuff, and it's like 20 people. But normally, the preference is, in fairness, to go out when you can vote at the fire station and do the whole thing.
Okay.
I wonder how different it is from, I mean, there's going to be this inherent unknown with the whole idea of the lease, because if the whole bond doesn't get passed, then the lease is sort of irrelevant too.
Yep.
Right, so it's never gonna be surefire, it's always going to be up to the vote, so, I don't know, it might also make sense to think about, do you have them both on the same thing, or do you tie them together, or are they on, maybe they're on the same bond, and then that means that, and you kind of have an A and B, but I think you're gonna have to figure out.
I don't think we
Something
can do
there.
that,
The
because I
ballot
think the
question,
bond
so.
is on a school ballot and the other's on a municipal ballot, so they're physically different.
Different?
We could, if
pieces
they were
of
at the
paper.
same time, though, it might
At the same
it might
time,
make
yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
But that's why this vision's so
It
important.
might be good or bad, right?
Yeah.
That's why the what?
The vision's so
Yes.
important, because it really, the details are gonna change.
But then being able to communicate that to the towns and,
It's all about telling people, this is why we're doing it.
yes, so they can completely
They're not
understand.
gonna be dissecting the zoning ordinance.
All right. Any other comments? Because I'm going to go ahead and move on.
Was there direction? What are you gonna give us?
What I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of take the pieces that we got from Carol and Mike and kind of create a framework of criteria of kind of what we're recommending would or would not go in that space. And then I'm going to deliver that to Maria and ask about, what's the best way to get with the school attorney in terms of establishing the correct language for this.
And then will you take action on whether we're gonna do a zone change, or is that already?
Do you
Good-
think
good question.
concurrently Tyler can be having that conversation?
Yeah, I think probably so, only because of where we are in time
Okay.
as well.
No, you had mentioned you were gonna take
A vote.
a vote, so I just wanna make sure that before
Well-
we head off into left field, that
Yeah,
I've got the
and
right
and
instructions.
thank you for mentioning that, because I think we probably should have a motion and take a vote on that, just so that we have that on the record.
I'll make a motion.
Go ahead.
I move that Tyler or Oak Point Associates should have a conversation with the town of Camden's planner regarding our options for zoning at the MET location.
Second.
Did you say
Comments?
options for zoning?
I did.
Is that correct? Do we mean use? I mean, the zoning's already set.
Well, option, I
Well,
would think.
changing the zone.
Right.
Changing the zoning? Do we
Options
decide
to
to change
what
the
to
zone
change.
rather than?
Uses.
Because of the
Zoning
options.
and
That's where the
uses.
options come in, I think.
That's where the
Yeah.
options
Okay.
come under the zoning.
Okay.
Right?
I think
What kind of
the
a zoning
motion should be
review?
intentionally
A
vague
zoning
on
And
that, so that we're
recommend-
not
you want
committing ourselves to a
recommendations
path.
In a
but-
timeframe.
So change the options slash zoning.
Emily,
Zoning
are-
review
are
and
you-
recommendations.
Are you clear on,
You can, yeah,
Can we
what's
repeat
the
it? Sorry.
formal language of your motion? Because it just changed.
I know, everybody kind of jumped in.
I liked it.
Um,
one more time, Carol?
Well, it may not be exact, and it's on camera.
Well, we can get it all.
I make the motion that Oak Point Associates have a conversation with the Camden Town Planner to review zoning options / uses / recommendations.
Second,
Any questions or
Uses,
comments?
Review uses and recommendations.
Once you get it, Emily, why don't you read back what you have?
I'm not sure I've got it yet.
Well, that's the read back.
Move to have Oak Point have a conversation with the Camden Town Planner to review uses and recommendations for zoning.
Options was a key word
Options and
that stuck out in my mind.
Zoning options. It started with zoning options, uses, recommendations.
Okay.
That's what it said.
I think the intent of it is just to, it's a fact-finding thing, but not to commit us to any path.
Give you
right?
the information you need to make the
Right.
decision of which path you want to take.
Right.
Yeah. All right, any questions, comments? I'd like to wait for Marcia to come back, if it's not long.
We have quorum, we can vote without her.
Yeah, all those in favor?
No.
Those not? All right, thank you. Is that good, Tyler?
It is.
Feel like you know where to go and what to do?
As long as you understand it, yeah.
Okay.
And you can, I think you can go off of that too a little bit, if things in your conversation should arise that were not in the motion, then, yeah.
Let's make a little latitude.
Right, yeah.
I figured.
All
Help
right.
us, help us.
So the last agenda item that I have on here, although I normally have more, but we're never going to get to the building systems tonight, is communication to the community about accepting proposals for the space and the best path forward to try to accomplish that. So I am open to ideas. I mean, I don't know how things were done previously as it related to the bond for the middle school, if that was effective. Do we post something in the newspaper? Do we set up tables anywhere and everywhere? Just looking for ideas that we could perhaps put a plan together to get the word out that if there is some space available and here's the criteria, and interested parties, we would need to establish, present by this date, we'll review by this date, make a decision by this date. But at this point, I'd just really like to understand, how do we get the communication out? Allison?
Because I would think the most appropriate thing would be to start with some kind of a letter to the editor, a press release written by, probably coming from you or coming from the whole committee, just letting people know what we're doing and why we're doing it, the basic premise of using it for the superintendent's office in the Zenith program, and then explaining that we're gonna, trying to use the basement to offset revenue a little bit, and then also probably giving people an opportunity to inquire. One of the things about the last time around is there wasn't a lot of opportunity. It was like you could submit your proposal, but there wasn't an opportunity to ask questions about it ahead of time. And so finding a way that we could deal with questions rather than making everybody come to like a full meeting and present something, if we all were to vote that, okay, it's okay with me if Bob is the contact person, or, somebody can email Bob to ask more questions, and if he feels that it's something that should come to the whole committee, then he can do that. But, just like the basic little things that people might want to know, that they would have somebody, a way to move forward with that.
Sure,
I think people just need to know what we're doing,
sure.
first of all.
Don't disagree.
Was there a form given or a format given for people to give their proposals on last time?
It was a deadline.
It's a full RFP process.
Is there?
Yeah, I wouldn't want to
Do
try
that
to
again.
copy that process. I
Yeah,
think we
that-
really want a very simple RFP process.
Or not even an
It's not
RFP
an
process, it's a
RFP.
public outreach, isn't it? Like,
Right.
Soliciting.
That's part of that, I guess, also with the RFP. to give
A
them
request for
parameters,
expressions of interest.
proposals, huh?
do you-
Right.
I don't know. Do you think so I think that we're already ahead of the public on this because we're in these meetings and we're moving forward. It's almost like we have to have a meeting that tells the public what we are, what we're doing, and where we're going. Or maybe initial list of guidelines for, in addition to telling them that, there's the Zenith space, there's the superintendent's offices, and there's this basement space that we think we can utilize to help offset the bond, and we'd love to hear your input on that part of it. And that's it. And then like in that meeting, you could be writing down stuff on a board, and it becomes part of our process so that when we come back to them again, maybe we see some of that in there. Rather than a formal RFP process that really, I don't know.
Okay,
It's like too overwhelming for people at that stage.
I don't know.
And for us, I think it would be overwhelming. I mean, that would become our whole task.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
I think maybe something similar to just a letter of interest, right? So you have those, so in engineering, you'll see that something will come out really early, that you'll have to submit a letter of interest, which basically says, this is my enterprise, this is why I'm interested in this space, this is about how much space I would use, here's why I meet your criteria. You could limit it to one page, you could give them a one-page form, and it would sort of be, you would be seeking these letters of interest that would help us identify really how many people really might be potentially interested in leasing it. Not because we're going to select one of them, but partly because it would be helpful to know if that's 25 or 1, what their uses are, how many ideas, and you might hear things in their letters that were informative to us as we move forward too.
I think you might be onto something though with that, even stepping back a little bit more and not just opening it up to people who might have a proposal, but to give the public an opportunity to be part of the brainstorming and to say, because I think it would be a fair criticism later on if we didn't kind of.
Right, I think it's less about trying to find a tenant, it's more about making sure the public is on board with what we're doing and is gonna support it.
Because if the project doesn't pass.
Well, yeah.
There isn't gonna be a tenant.
And the
That's right.
tenant, if we do our job right, there's gonna be kind of this vision, as you said, Pete, right? There's this vision, Zenith, superintendent, and there's some space that can interface with the community. If everyone buys into that, then it's gonna be someone else's problem to negotiate a lease and get a tenant in there, it's like, not even this committee's, it's downstream that happens. And it's not only downstream, but it's like maybe 2 years away, because how long do you need while the construction's going on, how long do you need the classrooms over here?
Right.
So,
June of 2020.
well, there you go, so that's a good piece of information. So,
That should
it's
go
so far
somewhere.
downstream, like the actual user,
Right.
and it would be really cool if it is the teen center, because I think that's gonna be a good sell to the public, or the public would be on board with that. But it's more about the public being on board with what we're doing and the ultimate referendum vote.
So are you thinking, Mike, or proposing that, we need to get word out about actually having like a forum or a
Yeah.
discussion?
Yeah, and I think that should be done sooner rather than
I
later,
agree.
because we
Yep, we have to.
we've already created, or you're going to
A
send out
standard for
a
framework.
criteria list to us.
Maybe
So,
we can hold off.
Well, no,
Well,
I think that's okay, because
do
I think you
too.
could float that at that
Yeah,
meeting.
say
But
this is
that's,
what
I mean,
we
that's
have.
just like really big idea
Mhm.
stuff, and we would like more input on this. This is what our initial
Yeah.
things, you
yeah,
know.
but my point is, before we get too much
I agree,
further
like, it
down the
shouldn't go to
road,
the attorney or
contacting the
anything.
attorney and
Should be
having
just
all
a
those
list at first, I
expenses.
think, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe that does make sense.
And then we
not
have the
to-
information from Tyler, from talking to Jeremy. So that would help
It'd be
inform.
informative, like, yeah,
It
we
would
have a
be really
zoning problem
informative.
here,
This is
that's
what
an
we know.
informative thing, right?
Yeah.
It would all, go ahead.
Nope, that's all right.
I was just gonna say, it would inform the idea of what you would want to do with the zoning too. If you find that 90% of the applicants wouldn't be permissible without a zoning change, that would be really good information and a reason to be going after that change and,
Or not.
or not,
Right.
right? But I think that you would have this information of why you want to do one thing or the
Sure.
other.
So I kind of hear a two-prong. I hear like a forum and then also a letter of interest. That's kind of what you were
Right,
suggesting.
I think that would come after, so once you had the forum, and at that point, you could invite people to
That's the
submit
next- the
something.
next
'cause it-
step.
Right, I think it's
Okay.
almost like having a survey, right, that
Yeah.
tells you. And then you can start getting some real identification to the interest, what group are they in, do they meet in, do they fit in your zone? Do most tenants only want 2,000 square feet, is it, kind of get some idea on those things.
So in terms of setting some dates for some of these things,
Yeah.
the next committee meeting is on the 24th. You want to turn that into a public meeting?
Yeah.
You say
And
that
then
again?
The next meeting is the 24th, so we want to turn that into our.
Well, let me ask this question. What do you folks feel is the best way to get the message out that we are going to, let's just say that we could do that on the 24th. What would be the best way to communicate that to the public, that, hey, here's a public forum that essentially would give you an update on what's going on with MET, but also a little bit of a brainstorming session in terms of utilization of some open space that would be available possibly in the basement. How do we let people know?
I'm not sure if 2 weeks is enough
Susan
notice.
has to
Facebook
finish.
pages and newsletters in the schools.
Yeah, I think 2 weeks is an aggressive thing. It's really challenging to get the public out to these types of things. For those of you that came to the middle school things, I mean, I think our best attended one is when we did a spaghetti dinner. I don't think you need to go to that extreme. But, and I would also recommend that if you're doing it before one of your meetings, that you do it as a two-part, keep you on with a regular business meeting, so that you're able to make the decisions on the zoning and other things, and then move the next piece into kind of a quasi-public forum / design charrette, where you put the boards up and leave pads of paper and pens on the tables, and just let people go to town. I think you'll be surprised with the information you get. It can be a fun process.
You're suggesting that we make decisions, that we have the official meeting also at the same time?
I would do it beforehand, because there's gonna be business things that you need to take care of, like if we're gonna move forward with zoning or other things that may not wanna wait for another 2 weeks after your
You
meeting.
can't afford to give up a meeting, I think it's.
And
think
and it
you
may
need
be
to add
that.
it.
Well, I wasn't
I think we
really
add a
suggesting
meeting.
that
I think you maybe
Yeah.
add a
6:30,
meeting one
yeah,
week
just
later,
follow
give
up
Yeah,
you more
with the
time.
public
that's what I
meeting.
was thinking too.
Yeah.
I don't know if we want to be making decisions about zoning at the same time as we're, like,
Well, it's a different meeting.
like a different,
It's-
right,
it's-
that's
I
what
mean,
I'm saying.
We have our meeting at 5 o'clock, and then we have a public meeting at 6:30.
Oh,
I mean, we'll
Or
probably need
reverse
to
it.
talk about the
Or-
schedule, there's other things we don't want to stop our.
okay, well, I guess it was just
Yeah.
like the zoning, it was the
Yeah.
idea of maybe that would be part of the
I
public.
think that was just an
Maybe it's
example.
maybe it's a poor example.
Yeah.
All right,
Then-
we can talk about the agenda.
Then the next step would be to actually be ready to go to the public with the invitation for the letter of interest. And
Yeah, I mean, I'm not even sure about this letter of interest, to tell you the truth. I mean, like, that's almost like when you're ready to rent the thing out, it's like that's so far downstream.
But it isn't, I mean, the part of our charter is to be looking at
Possible tenants.
possible tenants,
I like,
so
I like
it's,
the idea of it, I mean,
yeah.
Okay.
I like getting the feedback.
I mean, I hear what
in
you're
another
saying
way.
as far as occupancy
Yeah.
would be at least 2 years down the road, but
Yeah.
kind of getting a sense of who might be interested, I
And
think
find out if there
could
is interest.
informative.
Right.
Right, I
Yeah.
think that's it. I
Yeah.
mean, maybe it's something, I guess, I might be willing
Interest
to try to
survey?
put
An
together
interest
a
survey.
draft of what that, just kind of a one-page form that had a place they could fill out, but, just one, something that we ask questions that are going to be helpful to us in our next steps. So how much square footage might you want, so ask some specific questions, so it's not just a letter that doesn't tell us the things we want. So we could put together just like a form that we could then just make readily available. People could just download it online and they would have a time to bring it to the meeting or submit it or send it in or something. I mean, I don't know if we'd get any interest out of it, but I would think it wouldn't hurt, and it would be certainly a proactive measure on our side to have done that, and maybe informative.
That's what I was getting at with the timeline, because if, for example, the public meeting's the 24th to get kind of brainstorming, if we say we're ready with a invitation to
At that
respond to
meeting.
this by June 1st, the next week, give us a week to kind of digest what we heard, give them 30 days to respond, that's June 30th. Then we have July to kind of
Yeah.
get our, that's where I was getting at. I mean, like everything else, we're on a very tight schedule. and-
Is,
Go ahead.
wait, I mean, we didn't have good attendance at those forums,
No.
really ever. And then I think sometimes I think the problem with that is we listened to what people said at those forums, and that wasn't always representative of what the wider population thought. And then I was a witness more too, because I wasn't as part of it, but witnessed I think the school board get pushback on not listening when they tried really hard to listen, but people didn't turn up, and it was hard to do that. And I wondered, as a result of that, and because of our time crunch, do we do an article that has a link to a survey at the bottom of it with some certain things, because we would get more immediate feedback. However we structure the survey, I don't know. Do we need to have everyone actually come physically to a place? There's power to that. I think it's a much more powerful way to do it. But if we're not going to get that many people there, and it takes 3 weeks for us to do that, rather than us getting an article out there together soon, putting a link to it, getting information, if we're just really seeking brainstorming information that allows us to more quickly get the letter out to say the request for, who's interested in using the space. I guess I'm just feeling like an urgency around the time frame that we have and the value of a forum that may be poorly attended that puts us further back in our time frame when we're already at a time crunch. That's just procedural concern.
Yeah.
I really like that. I think that makes a lot of sense, and I like the social media component. So it can be on our local online papers, it can be on Facebook, it can be on Twitter, it can be sent out through all the schools.
Well, it could be directed
Emails.
to realtors. I mean, those
It can
people
go
that
to the
might be-
chamber, it can go
Right. I think it's a great
everywhere.
idea.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily see it as two different things where you would have the information giving and then, wait and then put together the list and have it. I think it would kind of all be one thing, where you'd publicize, this is what we're doing, this is the progress we made, we're in the, we're generating our plan right now, and as part of that, we're looking for input on, from interested parties. So I don't necessarily think it has to be a two-step thing, it could be a one-step thing that we could do. I really do agree with Matt's points, though, about the delaying of the.
Yeah, sorry, but the reason I said what I did though is because I felt like I heard in the conversation that we wanted to do a more linear process of a forum to gather input before we then publish a criteria list. I think that then that criteria list would invite, welcome. So I don't think it was being talked about as like an all-encompassing in one go. I think it was, we want to hear from the public to get the vision that then informs a criteria list that then can be sent out. That's what I thought, and that's why I was trying to cut out some of the extra steps in that.
We want to hear from the uncommitted people about ideas, and then the committed people who might actually execute some of those ideas.
because the feedback thing was to hear from anyone that feels like they want to come and say, I think the basement would be great to be used as X, regardless of whether they have a business or any potential ability to
Right.
do
It's just
anything about
general
idea
public.
X.
Right.
It's just, I think this would be cool.
And they
that
may
can
not
say
come
that.
here to a meeting to express that, but they can quickly type that out.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
This, I think, is ease of use, and it's just time, like the time piece for me. Like I'm feeling super. I don't know. There's just a lot of work that we got to do, and if we delay it, and they just didn't get many people coming to them.
No.
Maybe this is different, but I don't
We did.
anticipate it would
No.
be.
Alice?
I would, first of all, volunteer to, this is what I went to school for, was online surveys, and all form is for people that just have a comment, and then, you know, one of the questions is, you know, do you have a potential proposal, or do you have this? And you can ask them some different questions. And I think we do hear, there are people too that would want to talk about this, but not, I'm all for the public meetings and the broadcasting and all of that, but sometimes you just want to find out a little bit and not, you know, have to be at this big public forum. So, and there's just so much competition for what happened, you know, the
It's a busy
time
of year.
of day. So, I think definitely we could, and if we wanted to have a little subcommittee that would make up a survey.
Because I've heard Carmen offer to.
Yeah,
don't
I would be
wanna-
willing to help with that. And I think just, I know this is my first meeting, and seeing kind of what the schedule is, I think it's really helpful for Mike, and hearing all the things and having read the chapter. I mean, I think that forming subcommittees is essential to meeting your timeline, because if everybody is doing every step, it seems like it's gonna be a real challenge to get there.
Don't disagree.
Also, should we insert with the idea of a deadline for proposals? I worry about going down that road at all, just because it is, the actual use of the building is gonna be so far away. And I saw it in our charter that we're supposed to, it would be great if we could secure a lease,
Yep.
but not that none of this is gonna go forward if we don't find, you know, the tenant that can then be part of this whole package that we sell to the voters. So putting a deadline, I mean, the reality is that we're probably gonna try to go forward and present something to the voters no matter what. And if that's the case, then there isn't actually you know, expressions of interest can and should come at any
Right.
time. It's not
Yeah,
like
I
if you
just
can't get all
wanted-
your ducks in a
right there.
row
You
by
wanna read
June
that, Bob.
30th, then,
Number 3.
you know, you're not gonna be a part of this. So finding a way to articulate that.
Maybe it's that the ones that are, you know, I mean, at some point that we have to have an endpoint where we just say, okay, we're gonna review these, and we're gonna use these as sort of our basis for some of our next steps. So maybe it would be something like that. Yes, you'd always accept the letters of interest, that would be fabulous. But, you know, internally, and maybe it's written on there somewhere that, you know, ones submitted by whatever date, you know, are gonna form the basis of further review and
Cost
and
estimates
planning,
or-
right?
Yeah, well, so as Carol pointed out, let me read this real quick. So if feasible uses for the basement are identified, explore, evaluate, and try to secure a favorable lease for future use prior to the referendum.
That's if.
Yeah, and I think a little bit to what the point that Wax was making very early on is, you know, I kind of go along with everything right up until, you know, securing the favorable lease part. I think if you were able to identify that, and again, I hate to sound like a broken record, but as it relates to the criteria, I just see that as being just a framework and we can start with that even with the public, say, as a committee, this is really what we're thinking about it should look like, but wanting to get additional input as a part of that. I just see it as more the starting point, and then allowing folks to provide their input, which I think is important.
May I speak? I'm only supposed to
Sure.
write, but I wonder if you want to put in the criteria the size of what space people want to use, because otherwise you're going to get people, I want to have a psychiatrist's office and I need 500 square feet.
Right.
I think you might want to put in your criteria that people need to use, unless you want to have a whole bunch of little chunks. Because we've talked about this, that you might want to put in your criteria that people have to have a minimum size that they want to rent.
Sure. Well, and I think that could even come out, be developed as a part of the survey component as well. So, all right, so as a deliverable, I see, I've got Allison and Carmen developing a survey, yeah?
Great.
Which I think is a great idea.
Thank you. That's
I think
great.
That's huge. All right,
And so we'll present that at our next meeting, or we could, maybe even we would send it out ahead of it,
if
or,
you've got it ready ahead of time, I think that's,
right, if our goal is to, we'll send something out ahead of time that you guys could test out, and then we can talk about
yeah,
it at the
and
meeting.
provide input.
I think time is of the essence, so sooner rather than later, if you can accomplish it, that would be great.
Yeah, for sure. All right. I think, so I can, well, I don't know, do we have agreement that, I like the idea in terms of what you've put together, Matt. I think generally, everybody kind of likes that idea, and focusing it more through an article and social media and doing that. I certainly don't mind reaching out to Linda as well. Are there other folks that you guys feel like I should reach out to? I mean, Linda is one person.
Well, again, Village Stoop as well. as
Free
Both
press.
Papers.
Free press.
Yeah.
Who's, what's his name, Bosch?
I don't know who,
That writes for
the only person I
Lewis.
know is Linda,
Lewis.
so.
Gotcha.
Betcher, thank you. Who's Betcher, and he's with Village Soup, isn't
Cameron Herald, yeah.
he? Yeah.
Or, I mean, Dan Dunkel is the Courier editor and the Cameron Herald editor, so I'm sure any number of those email addresses will work fine. But
Yeah.
And it's free press.
yep. I always forget the Free Press, but that one really, people really see that
Mm-hmm.
a lot more.
For them, they want people to.
So the Free
Yeah.
Press, Village Soup, the Penn Bay Pilot. Who else? Where else?
Well,
Are those the three?
Links
Those are
to
the three.
Facebook and
I'm sorry?
social media.
Does it make sense just to, might as well send it to the Portland Press Herald and Bangor Daily News also? If you're gonna send out a press release, you might as well.
Yeah,
It never hurts, right?
right.
Because they have the coastal.
Well, how about some municipal newsletters? Or Facebook pages for the schools,
I mean, we can always link it.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
like the,
because you.
We
get
can
all the
always share it.
parents.
Everyone
yeah,
can
like the
share.
stuff they send home on Fridays. At least I get.
What do they
I
send
get a
home on
great
Fridays?
newsletter every,
Yeah, in the
from
newsletter.
the elementary school, every Friday, it's like Friday Flash News, and it's pretty impressive that they, they do it every time. But,
Yeah, something like
Yeah.
that would be great.
Now, do you guys see this as being a press release, or is it sitting down with somebody like Linda or others with these and having a conversation and having them write an article?
You start with a press release. and if they
Yeah.
want
And
to
that's-
see
Be easy on them.
It's easier for
Right.
everybody.
You also
Fine.
control
Save
the
your
story.
time.
You write the article for them.
Yeah,
Much
control
easier-
the story.
Much
Yeah.
easier to get it.
sometimes they
online.
take it apart and turn it into their own story, but.
Yeah, well, I can start putting that together. Boy, I'm out of town all of next week and part of the following. But I'll start crafting something and probably run it by everybody and get your input. So, editing doesn't hurt my feelings. So,
Thanks.
all right. Great. Anything else?
Can I just ask about the rest of the agenda?
Sure.
So you have review building system needs and costs, and is that a question for Tyler?
I'm gonna send it offline. We've got a kind of a 3-option piece from rough costs, kind of orders of magnitudes that I can send out as a memo.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that would be.
That would be
I mean, that's
great,
my
and
personal
then
opinion.
I'd see that probably being more of an agenda item as we start building the agenda for the next meeting. We'll start digging into that, so. Building systems, Tyler.
Look at that stuff.
Mike, you could probably send out, as you get the timeline. put
Yeah,
together, you could just
I'll
go ahead and
circulate
send that
this
out.
way before the next meeting.
Yeah.
So,
And I'll send out the criteria. I'll try to do that even as quickly as tomorrow, the framework of the
Is this the
criteria for you guys
proposed
to
basement
review.
plan or an existing basement? This is proposed, right?
I have a
They
question
weren't
for
sure to get an
Tyler.
idea of how much space, we dropped in a couple stairs, and then just wiped out everything else in between.
Tyler, if I could just ask a question. Before you got here and Mike was sharing his timeline, one of the questions that came up was the building programming. And you're having conversations with Maria about that
Yes, they've given
program?
us a bunch of stuff to get going with.
Okay, so,
What is that, do you have a sense of timing on that at all, Tyler, at this point, or is it a little premature?
It's a little premature, but we've got our feet pretty well into it. I think that before we get too far into it in this forum, we'll have vetted it pretty well through the
Okay.
central office. I think that was our understanding of the process.
Okay.
So.
We probably need a date though.
Yeah, do you think, so this committee doesn't have to dive into the programming and inform you, you're on top of that?
Yes.
And as far as the basement space, we may have these other possible tenants that may feed into this a little bit, but.
Yeah, and we can do some options, quick layouts.
Well, that'll just happen naturally as those conversations progress, but for the rest of the building, when do you think you'll have the programming known or done?
The programming, I think, will head pretty well underway in the next couple of weeks.
Okay.
I'm not sure if we'll have
So-
an agreed upon floor plan or concept yet, but
So let's say by the end of May.
yes.
Then, outline specs. I realize there's a lot that goes into
Yep.
that, like the systems, and maybe if we do have that as an agenda item, we can dive into that a little bit.
That would be helpful. We've got, our mechanical engineer put together a pretty nice little short one-page write-up of, I think, 3 different realistic options for this building.
Okay.
Kind of gives you the pros and cons, but it doesn't dive too far into the technical aspect of it now.
Okay.
A little bit of the orders of magnitude on costs, so that'll help inform the decision, and it starts to be kind of a big component of that basis of design.
Yeah. And the other question that came up was, once you have, a schematic floor plans and an outline spec, how long before a cost estimate can be generated?
Once we have the floor plan, I think it'd be a couple weeks.
Okay.
We do that, all of the people working on the project will do that in-house. So
Yeah.
we can do that, get the floor plan, like you said, kind of underway, and then start crunching numbers, and then we can do the updates based on different scenarios.
Right. And we were talking about, and I think we talked about this at the last meeting, that going out to get a second opinion on cost. And so if that's the case, we kind of need a deliverable from you. It can't be all in-house and kind of happen.
Oh, no, absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
the basis of design will be a document that
Right.
goes along with the floor plan.
Right.
To whomever you decide to have a third
Yeah.
party.
I think we wanted your cost estimate as well. but
Oh, yeah.
We want a
Yep.
second one, yeah.
yeah.
So,
So do you think that's mid-June or late June?
mid-June for outline
It's gonna be-
specs and
yeah.
floor plans?
Yes, that's very realistic.
And cost estimate?
Yep.
Okay.
I think if we're gonna move it forward at this pace, we need to have it no later
Yeah,
than mid-June.
that's what I was thinking.
All right, would, if we have building systems as kind of as an agenda item for the next meeting, is that really gonna take up pretty much, is that a pretty big discussion, and that would take up most of it?
I don't think so. I think it's really, I mean, if we're just talking mechanical systems, I don't think it's a huge component.
I'd like to talk about the elevator.
Sure.
Maybe we need an elevator subcommittee.
Well, I don't know about that.
No, no,
I was wondering if we could get like someone from Otis or someone to come up here and say, where's the elevator? Right here, right?
Pine tree.
Or Pine Tree that says, takes a look at the shaft dimensions and says, yeah, we can put something in here.
Keep in mind, though, it's not just the shaft. There's a lot of other things.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So,
And the site.
Yeah. I mean,
The
I-
site.
The
we
site
haven't
is an
seen-
issue too, and
Yeah.
thank you for getting me that drawing, I'm just looking at it now. I mean, in essence, the site was designed with this gone away, and it feels like that, looking at it now,
Yep.
so.
Yeah.
I think some work needs to be done to kind of make it feel like the two mesh together, and I realize that parking's an issue, but if some of the parking's staying on that side of the building, maybe there's some shared parking
It really depends on the need. I mean,
Yeah.
when we permitted this, that parking goes away, but now if we're introducing new spaces in the basement, the superintendent, Zena, we just have to make sure that we're doing our counts.
But isn't it true that the parking that you've designed for the middle school is designed adequately sized for that building?
Yes.
So people using this building should not be parking there. They have to park on the other side of this building. Which
Okay,
makes me
except-
very reluctant to have an entrance.
It's
where it
just
is
that the
now.
parking is right, I mean, within
And
5
that's why
feet.
you're gonna be fighting forever to have people not park there. Because it's not,
So
that's
But it-
required for the other
that's why
building.
I'm saying why fight it. Just
Right, because there isn't
share,
enough
yeah.
space. It's sized correctly.
Yeah, there's no extra parking in this, on the new side.
I'm
And there's
all for
very,
sharing, Jim.
once you get into it, you'll see there's very limited space to move that parking lot around when you see the grades,
I
the
know.
location to the playground, the cuts, the site traffic and sight lines coming off of Knowlton Street was a big thing when we went before the planning board as well. So it's,
So are we concerned about people having to walk far from the parking lot to the middle school? Is that the main? Because, I mean, there's parking all over the place.
Is there gonna be still parking along Milton Street?
there is, that doesn't change.
So, and did you take that into account, or is that that's separate?
That's separate.
All right,
We know that there's gonna be, but we heard a lot of complaints and a lot of pushback from people that came to speak about the parking on Knowlton and the impact that the school has on it.
I mean, they used to, when I was here, there was a high school here too, so it was double the students and all the teachers, and so it's actually, the total impact on Knowlton Street has decreased significantly over the years.
It was so long ago, no one remembers how bad that was.
Yeah, I guess you had all the high school
What, yeah.
students, a lot of people, a lot of kids driving to school too, and somehow we managed.
Just the parking's so close to the edge of MET that it almost feels like it either needs to be, like the handicap spaces could maybe go there and you go right into this floor level, I don't know. Or it seems like you either got to make it work together or you got to get some spaces out of there so it doesn't feel like it's right on top of it. That's what I'm seeing anyway, but,
I think the goal was to make that parking lot big enough that every staff member could park it and not have to park on Knowlton Street. That was the goal. To make it smaller, we've just lost that.
But having cars parked on the street really helps to slow people down. And we're having all these issues around town in places where one of the recommendations for when people complain about people driving too fast on their street is actually like more cars parked on the street because that slows people down. There's an unintended consequence of getting everybody off the street.
I didn't mean to get us off the rails. Bob. I mean, it's just, and I can talk to Tyler about this afterwards if you want. It's just, it's clear as day that something has to get done with the parking right there. I mean, there's maybe some opportunity to add a few more spaces somewhere else in the parking lot. I mean, up by the drop-off loop or something.
I think we're gonna be, it's tight. I know you know that, you've been up there and you see that plan,
Yeah.
All right, I'll
we're
let
also
you guys
fighting
have that
priorities.
conversation. I
It's
wanna-
a- it's
I
a
wanna
common
build
one
an
in the
agenda
public too,
for
though.
next,
It's-
for the next meeting. So we're gonna talk about building systems. I think we can review Mike's timeline that he'll get ahead of time. If, I don't know if there's any other criteria framework discussion that we need to have when I get that out to everybody in the next day or so. What else do we want to review or cover for as agenda items for the next meeting?
Well, I think
The survey
ideally, we're gonna have the
results.
survey done by then, so you're gonna, have the committee review kind of what we've come up with and give us some feedback, so we
I'm
can
thinking
go
that
ahead
you'd
on
probably
that.
send that out to the committee ahead of time, yes?
Yeah, I think that
Yes,
would
but
be
do
the
we want all
goal.
the feedback to be just over email, or are we gonna
I think.
authorize us to,
It's-
send it out?
It's
when-
my suggestion that, there's feedback via email to keep things moving. I think if we wait for every meeting, I just don't know that we're gonna get stuff done.
Doesn't the survey though follow the information piece?
I'm sorry?
You're talking about actually getting
Right.
survey results,
Right.
but first
The
they
press
need the piece
release.
that
Yeah,
you're
the press
doing,
release needs to be
so the
done.
public has the information to adequately respond.
I
Great, so
understand.
it would be a link sort of within that press
Yeah.
release.
It would be, I'm just,
Yeah.
done is
Yeah.
kind of. All right,
I think the other thing is Tyler reporting out from his conversation with Jeremy.
Oh, yeah, because you'll have done that by then, thank you.
Do you have other, I mean, it seems like when things have come up, you seem to have these pieces of information that the committee hasn't gotten yet, like the three options on the HVAC and kind of that you're in limbo on whether you should be going to the plant, to the town for the redistricting. Is there like a pile of stuff that we could get from you that we should be getting ahead, or maybe points that you could be telling us, geez, these are the things we've been assigned to do for you? It seems like you might want them. I mean, it
That's
seems
what
like
I
some of
asked.
these things we
Instead of
don't
us
even
asking for
know.
them.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
can
like
give
they
you
just come up.
I mean, we can give you a copy of our proposal. I didn't send the mechanical stuff ahead of time, because I thought we were going to speak about it, so we were just gonna go over it, so.
I'd really like to see all, like, kind of like we talked about that first meeting, like anything that you already have on MET after all these years of working, like, is there stuff written down about, the elevator and what's in, like, just any and all information that's already been generated about
Yep,
MET?
I mean, we dig and the reports are a big piece.
And Keith has some of that too, Keith, right? I mean, I saw something in an email where you discussed the elevator in great length.
Not even just the elevator,
Size
but
of
like,
the stairway, that
how do you
whole-
know you're already replacing windows and like, where
Stuff's
is that
in-
information?
It's in the facilities report.
But have
No,
you
we-
taken
I
that
didn't
out just
see
to
that
be
it-
specific to just the standalone MET building?
No, we didn't plan on redoing that report as part of this work.
But but that is what has been done for the HVAC, right? That you're saying there's three options specific to this as a standalone building.
When this is a standalone building, there is no HVAC system, so it was an easy thing to do. So I think the thing to keep in mind is that the original report was written in an effort and a project to reutilize this building as a major renovation. So it was written with a different flavor, a different overall topic at the time. So I don't think, we didn't propose to rewrite that into something specific to MET being
There's no
standalone.
intent that you're gonna be creating something new. I wanna be real clear
Right,
about
yeah.
that, so. If there's something that's existing that's helpful, then I think that makes a lot of sense. But certainly not creating something new is not desirable for any of us.
Yeah, and things may come up in this HVAC conversation. For example, we don't need to replace the windows because we're going to keep them shut because we have an HVAC system. So there's a major cost savings,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You don't open them. Yeah.
All right, so I've got building systems, review timeline, if we need to review criteria framework, the survey, probably just a brief discussion based on what's been sent out, and then Tyler kind of recapping conversation with the town planning office. I think that's a fairly full agenda. Then I'll work on the press release and have that out to you guys as quickly as possible. Like I said, I give fair warning. I'm literally planes, trains, and automobiles all next week and part of the following, so I will do my very best to try to put some things together, and again,
I'm willing to
welcome
help.
input.
I'm willing to help out
Okay,
if you want to
that's great.
talk about
I
it.
will gladly welcome it. All right,
Bob, do we want to extend our meeting time till 7 o'clock for
Yeah.
the next meeting?
we just, the short answer would be yes.
That's why it was
I
a
said
quick
it, yeah.
I
question.
think we kind of, we
Yeah.
wind up kind of playing it by ear. We
Yeah,
covered
yeah.
everything, but I think
Yeah,
that's
just for
probably
planning,
a
you
reasonable
know, yes.
expectation.
Okay, I thought so, but
So in this,
Thank you.
when I came into the blog tonight, people
All right,
were
thank you,
talking
everyone.
about ramps into the basement. Or having a ramp. Is that like, that was.
If you could put your chair back behind the table, that would be great.
Right, well, that's not right. It's like a very odd thing.
The elevator, yeah, it's
Okay.
Crazy weeks.
Yeah.